Greetings and salutations. Imagine if I made videos that people asked for. What a fucking concept. Hi, it's October. It's spooky season. I like horror movies. I'm gonna tell you a list of my favorite horror movies so you can watch them this spooky season. Also, pre-warning, all of these are really basic answers. Horror is my favorite genre to analyze, and I have a very, very deep love for horror. I think last year in my English lit class, we literally had to introduce ourselves and say one thing we're passionate about, and I'm pretty sure I said horror movies. In saying that, I don't know many deep cuts. All of these are very basic answers, but you know what? They're popular for a reason. I've seen a lot of horror movies and these stand out to me, and it's probably because they're classics, most of them. But you know what? There's a fucking reason they're classics. Fuck you. Anyway, these are in no particular order. I'm just gonna fucking go for it. So first of all, my favorite horror film ever made and one of my favorite films ever made. It's in my top 10 films of all time. Scream! I'm not going to talk too much about Scream because if I start talking about Scream, I can talk about it for legitimately hours on end. I think it is a genuine masterpiece of a movie. You can go through each scene, anytime Ghostface appears, there is an intent behind, at least in the first film, exactly who is behind the mask, and you can tell by their physical characteristics. The use of time in that film and just all these little Easter eggs are so brilliant, and I could talk about Scream for legitimately hours, so I'm not going to, but Scream is one of the best films ever made. It completely redefined and changed the genre. And that, every decade or so, the genre kind of changes and there's a new norm for horror movies, I suppose. But Scream was really, really groundbreaking and revolutionary. You can tell when horror movies are before and after Scream. It was that impactful on the genre, and it's just brilliant. So Scream is about a masked killer going around a small town called Woodsboro and largely targeting a group of teenagers that are very centered around one girl named Sydney Prescott. Speaking of horror comedies, another one of my favorites is The Cabin in the Woods. This came out in 2012, but was filmed, I think, in 2010, it's a very interesting situation with Chris Hemsworth because he filmed this movie before Thor, but it came out after Thor, and that just makes me laugh. I don't want to really say anything about this movie because I went into it blind, and I think the best way to go into this film is to go into it blind. It, again, is largely a commentary on the horror genre. Apparently that's my kink, is just commentary on the horror genre. It's very, very funny. It's brilliantly done. There are so many references to other horror properties, whether it be films or video games or whatever. So if you like horror and you haven't seen this, please give it a watch. I feel like if you're a fan of the horror genre, you will have seen this movie, but it's absolutely brilliant. It's essentially, the main gist is it's the usual horror tropes. A group of teens go into a cabin in the woods for the weekend and a lot of shit goes down. Another horror comedy is what was my favorite horror film of last year, Ready or Not. This, again, I'm not going to say much about the plot because I think you should go into this blind. I think a lot of horror movies, it's best to go into them blind. That's how I like to go into any film, but specifically horror, that's how you have the best experience. Ready or Not, Samara Weaving is the main character, and I'm in love with her for one thing. But Ready or Not is essentially about a woman who's marrying into this family who are rich from making board games, and so in order to properly be initiated into the family, she has to play a game with them. That sounds like a Saw reference. It's not. This is not a horror comedy, but this is the scariest film I've ever seen. I'm pretty desensitized to horror nowadays because I watch so many of them. I love horror films that they don't really scare me anymore. It takes a lot for a horror movie to scare me, and I could not sleep for legitimately couldn't sleep for about a week after seeing this and was terrified of the dark for a month after seeing this. Hereditary. One, Toni Collette should have got an Oscar for this, her acting performance. Same with Nat Wolff. Absolutely insane. I said Nat, it's one of the two brothers. I think it's Nat Wolff. I don't think it's Alex. Editing Ashlee here, it's Alex Wolff, you dumbass. Just their performances are absolutely insane. But this movie is fucking terrifying, and I'm not gonna say anything about this because just watch it. Just watch it. If you want to be legitimately scared, watch this fucking film. It's also brilliantly made. It's so fun to analyze. The cinematography is stunning. There's so much really interesting imagery. If you like film and you haven't seen this, watch it just to analyze it from a film perspective, but Jesus Christ. My next actual favorite is the original Child's Play. I'll be real, I haven't seen the remake. That's something, I watch a horror movie every day in October, at least one. And one of the ones that I'm going to watch this month myself is the Child's Play remake, because I never got around to seeing it, but I want to watch it specifically for Mark Hamill. Child's Play, the original, you know what Chucky's about. It's about, like, a doll and a spirit gets put in it and he's trying to kill people. The initial Child's Play, this movie, is a brilliant horror film. The sequels go in a very different direction, and I feel like when people think of Chucky, they think of, like, you know, Chucky and Tiffany. This isn't that. This is a straight horror movie. Chucky is, you know, he's inappropriate, but not in the way that he is in later films. I don't remember what year, but it was 80s horror, and I love 80s horror. So speaking of 80s horror, Nightmare on Elm Street. Nightmare on Elm Street, you probably know, is about Freddy Krueger, who is a killer who goes into children and teenagers' dreams and kills them in their sleep, and then they die in real life. This concept, when I was a child, was the scariest thing to me. Before I saw Nightmare on Elm Street itself, there is an episode of Charmed called, like, Dreamcatcher or some shit, which is essentially the same thing. They have a Freddy Krueger type who goes into people's dreams and kills them, and that concept was the scariest thing to me. So I stayed away from Nightmare on Elm Street I don't think I saw it until I was like 14, and I got into horror when I was 11 or 12. I stayed right away from it because the concept terrified me, and the concept is executed very, very well in this film, although I do hate the final scene. This also has one of my favorite final girls of all time. Speaking of Nightmare on Elm Street, if you watch Nightmare, there are a lot of Nightmare sequels they vary in quality quite a bit. My personal favourite one that I think is brilliant is Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Nightmare on Elm Street 2 is also a very, very interesting time. It is very gay, and I love that. The next one, again, 80s horror. Again, this is probably the most famous horror film of all time, actually, but it's absolutely brilliant. Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. This is also one of my favorite Stephen King novels, but they're drastically different properties, like, very much so. I also haven't actually seen the miniseries that Stephen King, I think he produced or directed or did something. The one that he likes, because Stephen King does not like this one because it strayed so far from his novel. But Stanley Kubrick is a genius. He was fucking awful to Shelley Duvall on this set, which makes me very sad, but her performance is outstanding, and it's a brilliant film. Again, I don't want to give that much away, because if you have been privileged enough to not really be aware of The Shining and the plot of The Shining throughout your life, just through pop culture, go into this blind. You'll have a fucking time. I also want to say, this isn't one of my favorites, but I did really love this, and it did underperform, and it broke my heart a lot as well, because I thought it was legitimately good. Dr. Sleep, which came out last year, Ewan McGregor as Danny Torrance. Dr. Sleep was a novel that Stephen King published relatively, like, it wasn't that long ago. I think it was 2015, 2016. I could be wrong. It was somewhere, I feel like it was mid-2010s. It was a direct sequel to The Shining. Dr. Sleep, the film, had a very tough job to do. It was an adaptation of the novel Dr. Sleep, but it was also trying to still be connected to the Stanley Kubrick film while not exactly being a sequel to it. It had a very tough job. I felt it legitimately did a really good job. One of my favorite horror villains ever is in Dr. Sleep. The next one is a little less mainstream. I think this came out in 2016. I saw it in 2017. Better Watch Out. So, as I just mentioned briefly before, I watch a horror movie every day in October to get myself in the Halloween mood, because we don't really celebrate Halloween that much here, and it's a little way of celebrating it for myself. I do the same thing with Christmas films leading up to Christmas. So from December 1st to December 24th, I watch a Christmas movie every day. This was a Christmas movie that I watched in 2017 when I was running low and I had never heard of it before. It turns out it was like an Australian, I don't know if it was an Australian production. The film is set in America, but has a largely Australian cast, and I believe was filmed in Australia. It is a Christmas horror film. And once again, this has a major, like, plot twist halfway through the film that I don't want to spoil because it's a fucking ride. But it's kind of like, if you made Home Alone into an actual horror film, it would look something like this. The next one you all are expecting from me because you're subscribed to this channel, but It Chapter 1. It's one of my favorite films ever. It's a comfort movie for me. I think it's also a brilliant horror film. I think it's a beautiful adaptation of the novel from Stephen King. I'm not as big of a fan of It Chapter 2, but It Chapter 1 is a genuine masterpiece, and it had to be. Who was I to not put it on this list? Everyone's gonna hate me for the next one, but it's Final Destination. Final Destination is the most 2000s movie to ever exist, honestly, and it's ridiculous in all the best ways. The first one also came out in, I think, the year 2000, and it was also very 90s, and I love it. And this whole franchise is kind of like a guilty pleasure of mine. I also really love Final Destination 3. The plot of Final Destination is essentially the main character is on a plane, and he has a vision of the plane blowing up, so he gets off the plane. A few of his friends get off with him. The plane does blow up, how he saw it in his vision. They were meant to die on that plane, so death then tries to track them down one by one and kill them off in the order they were meant to die on that plane. In some fun ways, they get more and more gory as they get on. Don't watch Final Destination 4. Just, if you watch this franchise, just don't fucking watch the fourth one. This franchise is a bit of fun. If you like gory kills, this is for you. This is also a very basic answer, but it is genuinely a masterpiece of a film, and films like these remind me why I love horror so much. It Follows. It Follows is essentially about I don't know if it's a demon. I don't remember. I haven't seen It Follows for a good few years. It's kind of like an STD. Basically, if you have sex with someone who has this thing following them, then it starts following you, and if it catches up to you, it will kill you. I think it's a demon. I can't really remember, but this movie is masterfully done. So ominous and scary, and like how slow approaching kind of like the demon is. Is it a demon? I don't know. Okay, also the next one is like the most basic answer of all time, but it's a classic. Jaws. I love Jaws a lot. I think Jaws is a close to perfect film, and I think that it's earned its place as a classic. It was, I think, the first summer blockbuster. Again, the sequels are dangerous territory. If you want to have a really good laugh, watch Jaws 3. It's fucking ridiculous. It has the worst special effects I've ever seen in my life. The plot makes no sense. It's set at SeaWorld. It's ridiculous. I can't really remember Jaws 2, and I remember Jaws the Revenge just being like mind-numbingly bad. Like, not funny bad like Jaws 3, just shit. The next one is actually one of my comfort movies. It's not scary by any means. Happy Death Day. This came out in 2017, and I actually had really low expectations for it, and then I fucking loved it. Tree and Carter are such genuinely great dynamic characters. Tree is played by one of the roommates from La La Land, which if you know me, you know I love La La Land. Happy Death Day is just a really fun time. It's essentially Groundhog Day, but a horror movie. So the main character gets stuck in a time loop where she's being killed by a masked killer every day, and the only way to get out of said time loop is to figure out who the killer is. The next one is actually a Netflix horror film that I think it was recent. I think came out last year or the year before, and it's called The Perfection. Trigger warning for this film: sexual assault is very present, is a large theme of this movie. So if that's something that's going to be triggering for you, definitely give this one a skip. Perfection was a really, really interesting story to me. It is, one, a sapphic story, which I love, and two, is kind of this story about the pressure that some people put themselves through to be perfection in their area of expertise, whatever that may be. In this film, it is two classical music players. I think they both play the cello from memory. The next one is, again, very basic and is a classic, but for good reason, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original. I haven't actually seen the remake. I don't really like any of the Texas Chainsaw sequels either. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the first one of the best horror films ever made. It just is. I can't dispute that. That's just a fact. The next one is also a Netflix horror movie that I think as well came out last year or the year before. It was also very recent. Cam. This is a story about a cam girl who essentially, I don't even know how to explain this. She's locked out of her account and then has her identity stolen, but like not like someone's still posting new content as her, but she's not posting it. I don't know how to explain this without it sounding insane. It's very good. It's very good. Give it a watch. Also, quite a few actors from Everything Sucks had like tiny roles in this from memory, which made me happy because I still miss Everything Sucks. Netflix cancelled that way too soon. The next one is, again, very basic. Get Out. Jordan Peele is a god. I think Get Out was, in my opinion, I like Get Out a lot more than Us. I think Get Out is such an interesting new horror story. I think it is a brilliant story about like race in America and racism in America, which is very relevant right now. But Jordan Peele also just has such a love for the horror genre that is so clear and evident in his films, especially in Us. But yeah, I love Get Out. Get Out was one of my favorite films from 2017 in general, but definitely my favorite horror or thriller film, because it is a bit more of a thriller. It's a very psychological horror movie. The next one, again, a recent horror film that was met with a lot of critical and financial success, but A Quiet Place. John Krasinski is a god. I worship him like a god. I also love Emily Blunt. I think the inclusion of having a deaf character played by a deaf actress, and this is so important. This movie is just a story about family and how far we go as people to protect the people we love. It's beautiful. It made me cry. It's also, it's a freaky film. The creatures in this are like straight up really terrifying, and this film uses tension in such a masterful way. The next two I'm going to recommend are a film and its sequel, because I think both of them are fantastic, but The Strangers and The Strangers Prey at Night. The Strangers, the first one, has one of the like scariest scenes in any horror movie I've ever seen. I won't say what it is because like I want you to watch it and just see it and experience it yourself, but holy fuck, there's a scene in this that like haunts me. The Strangers is essentially about a not married couple, I don't believe, but a couple who are staying in their house, and they get a knock on the door from someone they can't really see, and then people in masks, the strangers, break into their house, and it's a home invasion movie. Basically, it's a home invasion film is what I'm trying to say. It's very 70s. It's like very, very highly influenced by 70s horror, which is brilliant. And then The Strangers Prey at Night, the sequel, which is set in a caravan park with the same group of strangers, killers, is very 80s influenced and has 80s music, and it's like has like neon lights and the coloring of an 80s film, and is absolutely fucking brilliant. I love 80s nostalgia stuff, and The Strangers Prey at Night is an 80s nostalgia horror film, and oh my god, I love it so much. And the last one I'm going to say is again a classic. It's a very basic answer, but it's like one of my absolute favorite horror films, the original Halloween. Once again, this is a film where like the sequels get really, really fucking weird and wild and messy, and there's like a bunch of different timelines. I think if you want to have a look at any of the sequels, Halloween 2, if you watch just the first two Halloween movies, that's a great duology. Halloween 3 is a completely standalone thing, which I kind of enjoy, or you can go from Halloween 1978 to Halloween 2018, which is also a direct sequel to the first movie. That strikes Halloween, the original Halloween 2, out of canon, but I think Halloween 2 is still worth a watch. Halloween, if you don't know, is essentially about a masked killer who, I'm gonna just quote my girl Casey here, stalks babysitters. There we go. I've just quoted her and I'm happy. That's all. So that was a list of some of my favorite horror movies of all time. If you have any recommendations of horror films that I should watch this October, please leave them for me in the description. I love horror a lot, and horror movies specifically I just adore. And so yeah, if you have any recommendations for me at all, please comment them below. Please just talk about your favorites. If any of these are your favorites, let me know. If anyone would want me to make a video just talking about Scream and how brilliant I think Scream is in like any of time leading up to Scream 5, let me know about that, and I'll happily do that. Happy spooky season. I love you all very much. Thank you to my patrons. As always, you guys like literally, you're the reason I get to like eat. So I appreciate you a lot. So thank you for that. I love you all very much, and I'll see you very soon. Mwah.